Don, thank you so much for sparing time.
My pleasure, Alan.
You went in 1962 to Irian Jaya to live among the Sawi people. You, your wife, and your 7-month-old
baby son, Stephen.
Yes. That's quite a commitment.
It was indeed. It was like God was whispering to me saying, I want you to go there. They're the people I've prepared for you to bear witness among. I know they're cannibals. I know they're hedonists. Don't worry about that. I've taken care of everything. So we went there. I went in among them, and it turned out for a couple of years they'd begun to hear, in their extreme isolation, scattered reports about tall, pale, sickly-looking beings called Tuans. That means European types, because they're all black-skinned. They're like the separated cousins of the sub-Saharan black race. And all the reports about Tuans were so glowing, positive. Wherever Tuans go, they're being obat, medicine, garam, salt, steel tools, nylon fish line, fish hooks, razor blades. From their point of view, this was all amazing technology. So they were saying, we think we'd like to welcome a Tuan. And asking other tribes, are there any spare Tuans around? Only to have the other tribes say nastily, a Tuan live among you? Who do you think you are? You Sawi, you're the worst of all the tribes. Don't get your hopes up. You'll never be favored by one of these rare, amazing beings. So the Sawi were saying wistfully, perhaps they're right, perhaps we'll never be favored, but they also said, just in case, someday, somewhere, there's a Tuan who finds out that we live here. If he decides he wants to come and live among us and does not allow the anti-Sawi propaganda of our enemies to turn him away from us, we find out that Tuan has chosen us. We will let him know in no uncertain terms we choose him. He'll be our Tuan, we'll be his tribe. Well, Alan, I'm a Tuan. My wife, Carol, a Nyonya, a female Tuan. We even had a little baby Tuan, little Stephen. When I went in among them to test their attitudes, leaving Carol and Stephen in a safe place, they found out I was one of these rare beings they'd been hearing about. I used sign language indicating I wanted their help to build a house. They got the message. They began shouting for joy. And they worked like bees in the hive, helping me build a little 7-meter by 7-meter thatch roofed house. And when it was finished, I said, still using sign language, I'm going now to fetch my wife and son. I'll return with them in 3 days' time to reside among you in this little house you've so kindly helped me build. We came back 3 days later. 400 of them were massed on the riverbank, waiting to see if I would keep my promise and return with my family. We got closer and saw all the men had war paint on. They were holding weapons. Was this a welcoming party or something else? Were we being invited to dinner or
as dinner?
To be dinner. Too late to think of retreating. We went up onto the shore in the midst of that armed host. They closed in all around us so tightly we could hardly move. Their eyes were gleaming with excitement, but they were apparently waiting for a signal. And sure enough, someone shouted a signal, Asa! And at that, they began shouting for joy, pounding on their drums, and danced around us, escorting us away from the river up to the front steps of the little thatch box. Took us several minutes to get there. Then they grew quiet, motioning to us to climb the steps because it was built up above the ground because of monsoon flooding. We went inside. When I closed the door behind us, they began pounding on their drums again, danced around us all night. All the next day, all the second night, all the second day, even all the third night. We were welcomed royally. They carried the weapons and wore the war paint in much the same way that a military honor guard in our culture wears military uniforms and holds bayonets, welcoming a special guest.
Because the funny thing about their culture is that it's completely unlike ours.
Yes, that's true.
It's a culture of treachery in that the heroes of their stories are the guys who do the bad things.
When I learned the language well enough to tell them about Judas betraying Jesus with a kiss of all things, that tickled them. They began acclaiming Judas as a special kind of Tare Duan, a master of treachery. They said, tell us more about Judas. He's our kind of guy. He's the sort of man any one of us would be proud to promise a daughter to in marriage. Believe me, that was not the response I was expecting. I sat among them praying, help, Lord, help, I need a gift of wisdom. These people honor treachery as a virtue. They think Judas as the hero, Jesus as the dupe to be laughed at. And warfare broke out to make things darker at that moment. 2 of 3 villages that we welcomed because they wanted to come out of the deep jungle, live in the open by the river, in proximity to the Tuan and the Nyonya. It was great to have that many people living close. We thought we'd have one village, but 3 came. And 2 of them were not able to restrain their memories of previous violence. And they were fighting each other right around our home. And then when I learned about their idealization of treachery, their honoring of masters of treachery as heroes, I thought, I think God has placed us in the midst of a culture that is devoid of any mechanism for making peace. I was wrong. It was possible in a context of idealized treachery only if a father in one of 2 warring villages was willing to establish a basis for mutual trust by making a sacrifice so great that everyone in both villages would know he had to take one of his own children, give his child away as a peace child, to be raised by a family in the enemy village. And if that child remained alive in the other village, the peace was secure. No one would be so evil as to invalidate a sacrifice as great as that by renewing hostility after.
You went on to come up with this idea of redemptive analogies in different cultures.
Yes, Alan, because I thought they were not going to make peace, I offered to move away to another part of the same tribe so that these villages that used to live many kilometers apart with dense jungle in between would go back where they were before. It was only our presence here that drew them together and thus made it easier for them to fight almost daily. So I thought it's in your best interest that I go away. Well, they didn't want that to happen. They appreciated the fact we were saving lives virtually every day with medicine like penicillin, anti-malaria drugs. And so they said, if it means our violence is about to drive you away, we have to do something about it. The next morning, a father who was blessed with only 1 child, after years of marriage, walked down the row of longhouses to see if any of their other fathers who had several children each were willing to give one of several children as a peace child. None of them were willing. They couldn't bring themselves. So he said, I will do it. This had never happened in living Sawi memory, that a father blessed with only 1 child gave an only child. He did. And the people were all absolutely awestruck. This is the greatest sacrifice ever, to give an only son. That's what Kayo has done. We are bound to peace. And they began to celebrate peace. And I saw people laying their hands on the little peace child that Kayo placed in the arms of an enemy father. Each one who touched the peace child shouted these words of pledge. Any team I receive this child as a basis for peace. And the peace was secure. And I said, Lord, I was praying for a gift of wisdom. I had no inkling you had prepared this. You somehow sovereignly overruled in the formation of this separate human society to guarantee there would be this as an eye-opener for me to use as your messenger. And I did. And when I proclaimed Jesus as the peace child, they said, you say he's a peace child? Yes, given by the greatest Father to establish the greatest peace between God and man and his fellow man. Oh, wait, didn't you tell us that someone named Judas betrayed him with a kiss to be killed? I said, yes, I did. I was horrified you acclaimed the betrayer as the hero. They said, Don, you didn't tell us that Judas betrayed a peace child with that kiss. If you told us that, no way would we have acclaimed him as a hero. Judas's rating slipped, Alan. Jesus was unveiled as the perfect personal fulfiller of their own uniquely Sawi peace child custom. So Jesus was the Lamb of God for the Hebrew people. John chapter 1, verse 29. He became the Taraptim Gadon, the greatest possible peace child for the Sawi. And then he went on to become other things for other tribes. When I wrote my second book called Lords of the Earth, which not as many people have read because it's a thicker book, and I think people look at it and say it may be a good book, but I don't have time to read that many pages. But if they do, they'll find out a tribe in the mountains that killed 2 of my world team colleagues, September 1968, riddling their bodies with arrows as thick as reeds in a swamp. I found out later when I was able to go safely among them, study their culture, they had places of refuge, reminiscent of Old Testament cities of refuge. They would never shed the blood of a man, no matter how bad an enemy he was, if he was standing on sacred ground. So Jesus, who became the true peace child for the Sawi, was waiting to be proclaimed to that tribe up in the mountains as the true place of refuge, the Osawa Ovelum. We found out about that, began to proclaim Jesus as the true place of refuge. They began to respond. It was like a cue that their culture was pre-tuned to, and it just opened their hearts and minds. Now there's a church in every Yali village, just as there is in every Sawi village down in the swamps.